Uh, 8.9 is on films of Greek Jewry. I will present or describe or depict a little bit some of the earlier films which are on various Jewish communities in Greece, and then toward the end talk about the Holocaust films. There are many more films that are Holocaust films because it was a big issue and because it's sort of that's something that people want to portray, but the films about Greek Jewry are during its time were more important and actually more widely distributed. But they're harder to find today, but at least so you have some idea. Okay. I was one of the pioneers of the original films. So on Salonika, Shimon Aplatoni and myself made a film on David Ben Venisti, a Salonican in Jerusalem. He came in the second Aliyah in 1912, 1913 with 4 other distinguished Salonican Jews, and they had a communa in the middle of West Jerusalem. They had in the courtyard, they had their own house, and it created a special atmosphere for the Sephardic immigrants. So on the right in the PowerPoint you see the pictures of the people in the communa, and there were also women. In the next frame, David Ben Venisti is on the left. He was in the Jewish Legion in 1920, and there in Salonika there was an Eretz Israel educator named Isaac Epstein, who was very influential in persuading them to make Aliyah, to be activists, to deal with modern Hebrew culture. David Ben Venisti was a pioneer, a geographer. He started the Israeli Hiking Society. He went all throughout the Judean desert, and he was like a informal youth movement like tour guide. He also had trips to Lebanon and Syria, and here I think this is somewhere near Hebron. He met some Arab Mukhtar or something, some Arab who was the head of a clan. And here's a picture of David Ben Venisti when he was much older. He was a rare Sephardi. In those days, he was only one of 4 Sephardim in all of Israel that received the Israel Prize. He was the head of the names committee, street naming committee for Jerusalem. So most of the streets you see in Jerusalem are people that he wanted to honor. A lot of Sephardim, a lot of rabbis, but biblical figures. Okay, there was another film made on Salonika by a French Salonican Jew of Salonican extraction. The film's called Salonika City of Silence by Maurice Amaraji, and here you have quotes from the critiques. I'll just read one. The object of this documentary is to expose the disappearance, the obliteration, and the omission of a culture, the disappearance of the equilibrium during the Ottoman Empire, and the willful erasing of the nonconformist history of a city which did not adhere to the nationalist ideology that turned the Balkans upside down and continued to do so. In other words, Salonika was Ottoman, the Jews thrived, their Sephardic enclave thrived under the Ottoman system where the Jews were autonomy, and the modern Greek state was the beginning of the end. So it says, who still remembers Salonika, a multicultural city with a Jewish majority for a half a century? The ancient Jerusalem of the Balkans has become a forgotten city, a Judenfrei city. The film is organized around a stroll of the actual city, highlighted by word of some survivors of the extermination. Okay, now the Diaspora Museum made a lot of short 10-minute films about Jewish communities. One was about Salonika, so that you could actually order online. I made a film on Israeli TV about the Jews of Yanina called Yanina, Athens, and Jerusalem. It was aired on Israeli Channel 1 in 1989. In Yanina, Athens, Jerusalem, we talked about the Jews of Yanina, their customs. Unfortunately, the interviews about the customs, a lot were cut out. We featured also the Shaddai at the Israel Museum. We had a scene in their synagogue in Jerusalem. Of course, we filmed in Yanina, and we filmed in Athens also. there's obviously the end was sad. We interviewed a woman and her husband by the lake. The woman was deported and she survived. She talked about the wrath of the Greeks. She talked about how the public in Yanina came out in mass to jeer the Jews in the middle of the night. Yanina is a very lovely place. You see the lake here. You see a statue of Mordechai Frazis, the war hero. He was a Romaniot from Chalkis. We talked about him. The statue is near Yanina because that's the place where he initiated the campaign to push back the Italians when they invaded from Albania, and the initial place of the reprisal was near Yanina. There's another. So there's the famous author Albert Cohen. We talked about him. So two different films were made about Albert Cohen's novels about the Jews of Cephalonia and Corfu. And one of his novels was called Manch Klu, and this film was directed by the famous Moshe Mizrahi, and you have all sorts of details about this. One of the actors was this famous Armenian who died recently, Charles Aznavour. Now there's another film about the Jews of Rhodes. Okay, it's called The Island of Rhodes. The Island of Roses, the Jews of Rhodes in Los Angeles. The film was made by Gregory Wiens, who is a professional filmmaker, and he teaches film. Okay, so I'll quote one paragraph of the depiction of the film. This documentary film visits the Los Angeles community of Rhodes Jews who lived on the Mediterranean island of Rhodes from 1492 to World War II. They didn't live there in 1492, they came later, but whatever. It shows how immigrants from Rhodes settled in Los Angeles during and after World War II and passed down their traditions, food, songs, rituals, and their medieval Ladino Spanish dialect to their American-born children and grandchildren. Nice apologetic film, whatever. But that was made a long time ago. Since then, there haven't been films like that. Most of the films deal with the Holocaust. So there's a rare film that was made recently about the Holocaust on the Jews of Castoria by two descendants of Castorian Jews who live in America. Here, it interviews local Greeks who talked about the Jews, which is kind of rare because there's no one left who's Jewish there. I'll quote, illuminating the moving individual stories of the Greek Sephardic families forced from their homes when Nazis took control of the town. This carefully crafted documentary serves as a tribute and reminder of the many displaced communities forced out and afflicted by Nazi occupation. Now there's another film made in Greece, a Greek film. It's significant because it's local Greeks commemorating the loss of the Jews from their society through the Nazis and the Holocaust. It's called Cloudy Sunday, and in Greek, Ouzori Tsitsanis. It's about an ouzo drinking club where composers hung out. Okay, it's a Greek film by filmmaker Manousos Manousakis and is set in Salonika, Greece in 1942. It follows Estrella, a Jewish girl, and Yorgos, a Christian boy, who fall in love against the background of German occupation. Their relationship is forbidden by law, forcing them to seek sanctuary at the historic Ouzori Tsitsanis, presided over by one of the greatest composers and singers of the 20th century, Vasilis Tsitsanis. Inspired by real events, Cloudy Sunday follows the hunt for Jews and the precariousness of Estrella and Yorgos' situation. Another film which is accessible on the web is Fugitive Pieces. This is a story I actually influenced Ann Michaels to write about this. There was a survival story of the Jews of Zakynthos. We talked about this, but it turns out that she met in Toronto a Polish refugee from the Holocaust who actually found refuge in Zakynthos, made it all the way to Greece, and it's about his staying in Zakynthos. and the book is actually much more poignant. There's a film, My People. It's a story of the Greek Jews during the Holocaust, the Axis occupation, the resistance, the role of the Christian clergy, a hymn to love and courage as it is discovered by a young woman in the quest to uncover her Greek Jewish family's history. Another film is the Unsung Heroes of the Salonika, which is recent. It was on Israeli TV. Basically, it's only in Hebrew. It's more for an Israeli audience. It talks about 6 different Jews of Salonika who survived the war, who were living in the late in the 2010s. Okay, and each one has a different story. There's the famous Chaka Maestro, who was the work coordinator. And I also was in the middle of a film about him. But so Maestro also worked with a righteous Gentile called Jerzy Poznansky, who headed the prisoners' labor office. And Poznansky, it's interesting, but his granddaughter converted to Judaism, lives in Israel. Maestro's daily job was to place Auschwitz prisoners into their daily work commando groups. He had access to prisoners' files and was able to place Salonican Jews and some Polish Jews in easier jobs, thus saving their lives. Greek Jews who worked in the Canada camp, or commando, would smuggle him diamonds and gold currency with which he could bribe the Germans. In the picture here of the 6 survivors, Maestro is on the top left. In the middle on the top is Heinz Kunio. We talked about him briefly. So he was one of 4. His mother was a German-speaking Jew in Salonika. His father was Sephardic. Heinz and his sister and his parents survived the Holocaust. Of all 4, Heinz is the only one living. He's in his late 90s. He wrote a book on his experience in the Austrian camps, in the labor camps after Auschwitz, like Ebensee and Melk. On the Moshe Elion, who was tortured a lot when he was in Auschwitz. He was caught stealing bread, and he was whipped. So he also was interviewed with Rare about him in his later years as a retiree. He writes Judeo-Spanish poetry. He translated the Odyssey into Judeo-Spanish. A woman on the right, her name is Yvette Rozon. She died recently. She has a Holocaust story. It's not necessarily so unique, but it's a feminine voice also. Dario Sevi and Benico Jagon highlighted how the Greek Jews were further humiliated in Auschwitz because they did not speak Yiddish or Polish. And as a result, they were ridiculed by other Jewish prisoners, some of whom doubted their Jewish identity. Without Yiddish, they could not understand the Germans' orders and were targeted by them. There's another film, Kisses to the Children. Okay, this is a Greek film also, by Vasilis Loulis. It focuses on 3 women and 2 men who were children aged 5 to 11 during the occupation, and they speak. It's a documentary about the Jewish community of Greece based on testimonies of Greek Jewish survivors who spent the German occupation in hiding and talk about their lives. And it also deals with how some of them were helped by Christians. And you have 2 photos here at the end. It's not in the PowerPoint. I have 3 films. One is about Rosa Ashkenazi. She's the popular Rembetiko singer. Rosa Ashkenazi was originally from Turkey. She lived in Salonika, and then she moved to Athens. She was a popular singer, counterculture icon of the Rembetika Asia Minor refugee protest movement. You know, they talked about free love and sex and drugs. And she was very popular by the 60s and the 70s. And an Israeli made a film about her recently, A Sweet Canary. Okay. Another film here is We Are Not Alone, Greek Jews in the Holocaust, written and narrated by Isaac and Diana Dostis. He's 2nd generation from Yanina. He also is a theater person. He did a lot about Righteous Gentiles, a lot about the Jews of Yanina. It's his story of his family from Yanina and what happened to them in the Holocaust. His other film is called Farewell My Island, about the Jews of Corfu, about the deportation of the Jews of Corfu, their disappearance, and then he interviewed people who survived who came back. So it's a film, it's actually only 22 minutes, and it deals with the roundup of the Jews. So because Dostis comes from a Romaniot background and is interested in the Yaniot experience, he's also interested in the Corfu experience because it's also partially a Romaniot community, and he feels that it's underexposed. So Dostis was a very talented guy. He went back. He used to live in America. In his later years, he lives in Yanina to feel closer to his roots. And these two films are a very good example of what someone did in making a documentary that was simple but not easy to get the funding for, and to explain what these particularistic cultures were and what the experience was, especially in the Holocaust.